Yeah, so as I mentioned, the overnight development at Jagersfontein, not in fact another dam wall break, but just an overflow from a nearby water reservoir. So no injuries as far as we know, no damage reported. But of course, it all highlights that these areas need to be really carefully and constantly monitored. Tailings works often date back over 100 years. And it's all a very strong message coming from the environmental groups, is that the communities who live in these areas need a much stronger voice. They need to be listened to and included in plans to safeguard these old mines. Let's speak now to Hassen Lorgat from the Benchmarks Foundation. Hassen, thank you so much for joining us. So this overnight news on Jagersfontein was initially extremely alarming. It doesn't seem to be as serious as feared, but it really does hit home the point that there's much more that needs to be done in these areas. Would you agree?
Thank you for having me. It seems that poor people and workers are spectators in their own lives. I mean, everyone else talks about it. You've got political parties talking about it. You get the minister going there, everyone else. But the real voice of communities who have spoken out consistently, workers have spoken out a few days before the disaster, mining communities have spoken out, they do not get listened to, right? The organized communities feel that they have been disenfranchised. In fact, the global standards that the mining bosses have instituted do not go far enough to give voice to poor people. We believe voice must be given to poor people and to experts that they choose to call upon, to help them in their cause. So quite clearly, this is a shambles. As you rightfully point out, this mine was started in 1870 and it was bought by De Beers in 1940. And mining stopped in 1970, right? But the company that took it over, Jagersfontein Development, they usually reprocess all De Beers mine dumps for diamonds. And they fell out of the legal loophole. So which means, according to one of the lawyers, Richard Spoor, they are mining without any forms of taxation, any form of revenue going towards the state and such. And what you're finding now that the local authority and others are trying to show they care for their people, trying to build houses. But the likes of Rupert and others, who are primarily responsible for this disaster, go unscathed. Clearly, we need to get some rationality here and must start by giving rights to the poorest.
You say we've got to give voice to the poor, and there's two things that have come through very strongly for me, having heard from people who were interviewed on the ground. One, I think it was a woman who was saying, "We've been warning about this tailings dam. We could see it was a problem," and there was an initial response from one of the lawyers representing Jagersfontein Developments that actually owns the area, saying, "Well, these residents are not engineers." So quite dismissive, I felt. And then the other thing is that a lot of the local people, they earn their bread and butter from actually working with these companies. They don't want to lose those opportunities. So there needs to be a way of making it all work for the community's benefit, for the company's benefit. How do we give communities a voice? What does that actually look like?
Sally, let's be clear. We seem to talk about tailings disasters as if it is a post-mining phenomenon, or we seem to talk about it as if it is a phenomenon that happens in faraway places. I mean, Zululand anthracite colliery in 2020 Christmas Eve, I think, right, going into 2021, the mines, it burst, right? The sludge from the coal mine burst there. And it is an active mine owned by Turkish people now, Turkish owner. Clearly, there's a problem about how the administration, how government is regulating this. I do not take the minister's argument that their hands were tied by the court case in 2007, De Beers versus Atakwa Mining Company, which basically took DMRE out of action to monitor this. The truth is, when your citizens are at risk, the police, the water affairs, anyone can move in. So there's no excuse to act in the public interest, but they failed to act. The Minerals Council has failed to act. We do not know where these tailing dams are. Internationally, we believe there's about 30,000 active tailing dams. We need to have a map which points out in South Africa, this is a tailing dam from Sibanya. It deals with gold. This is one year that deals with coal. We need to have them mapped out, and there need to be some kind of board where citizens, local citizens, can be participating. They can call on their experts. The unions can be present, because this is a matter of life and death, not only for the affected, but for those who are living downstream. The principles that we uphold actually determine where tailings must be built, how it can be built, but it must be done with the consent, free, prior consent of communities. Far too often, black communities, poor communities have been ignored. You find these tailings, they're often in places like townships and that. This is an insult for a new democracy.
And I agree, and it does seem that there is a way to make a living. There is a way to do this right, but it is critically important, as you say, that the community is involved up front so they feel that they're equal partners. And equally government, and I've spoken to the Water Affairs Department, and they admit that they have been monitoring, but they would send out notices saying you're not compliant. But they don't seem to have the capacity or perhaps the will to really enforce non-compliance and consequences for non-compliance. And as you say, there are thousands of these disused mines. We're a mining country. It needs to be critically addressed. Organisations such as yours, is there a role for you to play, and what are you planning to do?
Sally, we need to seriously think of class actions, because the simple demand we make now is there must be greater transparency. We need to know where these mines are, and a clear risk assessment of whom it affects downstream. Are they upstream or downstream? We need to get experts involved, and we need to be able to see where they are so we can keep them accountable. Secondarily, we need to get rights for communities. Communities have no rights. They have no rights to redress. In fact, people, we don't even know whom to sue, right? The last time when women were raped in the Krugersdorp, right, they said to us that it was a derelict and ownerless mine. Yet when the portfolio committee went there, they said, no, this was, Mintails was involved, and it was Mohale Gold. Clearly, it seems that far too long we turn the blind eye to what corporations do to poor people. They've externalized costs onto us, and people die younger because they live next to slush, pollution, acids, all this. What is a tailing dam? It is the waste of mining. It is the cuck of mining that our people have to breathe and live by every day.
Yeah, absolutely. Hassen Lorgat of the Benchmarks Foundation, let us hope that this disaster leads to more scrutiny on the disused mines, how they're treated, and how communities living around them are looked after as well.